In Search of the Secret Center. This paper focuses on the historiography of the Secret Center, a group led by Ali Monsieur at the head of a group of more or less radicalized intellectuals, which played a leadership role in the constitutionalist agitation in Tabriz. The primary sources in Persian remain Karim Tahirzadeh Behzad's Qiyam Azerbaijan Dar Inqilab Mashrute Iran and Ahmed Kasravi's Tarikh Mashrute Iran. The former, the memoirs of a secret center leader, which the latter relies on, while the latter relies heavily on the leaders of the socialist movement in Tabriz, such as Esmail Yakhani and Haji Rasul Zidqiani. Origins of the Secret Center. Ali Monsieur founded a social democratic party for Ejtemaiyun Amiyun. According to Tahirzadeh, the party maintained political relations, quote, with the party of the same name in the Caucasus. Historians of the period agree that the Ferré in the Caucasus included many Iranian immigrant workers. Tahirzadeh says that it was founded after the constitution had been granted. Saying that the groups had, quote, political relations could indicate that they did not, however, have organizational ties, so that Ali Monsieur's group was not a branch of the Caucasian group and did not have to take orders from it. This will become important later. He then formed the Secret Center. It is unclear when it was formed and what its relationship with Ferré was. On the one hand, Tahirzadeh says that it was the, quote, action center of the party, quote, which was organized to carry out important missions, quote. In other words, it was a sort of front group for the Ferré. There is no mention in Tahirzadeh's account of any political education, including one and only speech Ali Monsieur gave to the ranks. What was emphasized was loyalty and unquestioning obedience. He was, Tahirzadeh, that is, was inducted into the center without any idea of the party's existence and on a vanishingly low level of political consciousness. On the other hand, he later refers to it as a sort of central committee of the Ferré. Quote, the committee of the Ferré was the secret center, since no one could have easy access to it, quote. This is odd, since the Ferré itself was secretive enough. Kasravi says that a Ferré Ejtemaiyun Amiyun was founded in the Caucasus by a group of Iranian immigrants there a year before the constitution was granted in Iran. After the constitution was granted, Ali Monsieur translated his platform and founded a party called Mojahed, and then launched a secret center which ran it. In other words, the secret center was, as Tahirzadeh said, a sort of central committee. The names of the founders of the group overlap greatly with the Ganjinea Fonun group of Europeanizing intellectuals centered around Sayyid Hassan Taqizadeh. This gives the center more the character of a group of modernizing intellectuals and socialists. Indeed, 2/3 of the secret center, indeed all of its prominent members, came from the Ganjinea Fonun group, and more than half of the latter were members of the former. Regarding Ali Monsieur himself, Tahirzadeh writes in his memoirs that he was an enlightened merchant of Nobar. He had set up a porcelain factory in Tabriz with a considerable investment. He won his sobriquet because of his knowledge of French. He was deeply impressed with the French Revolution and would often recite episodes from it. The upper-class quality of the Social Democratic Secret Center is indicated in Tahirzadeh's memoirs. On being induced into the Secret Center, he is told, he was given a membership form, quote, after a thorough investigation into the morals of the volunteers' circle and his family's good name. He chastises Kasravi for overemphasizing the Mojahed's role in the struggle, saying that it was the political activists, particularly Taqizadeh, who gave it direction. The Mojahids, he wrote, were not reliable sources, since they tried to exaggerate their services to the cause. Indeed, the real leaders were the intellectuals and not the Mojahids, whom the author deprecates. Secret Center's power. Kasravi makes a number of extravagant claims about the Secret Center's power to shape events, only to forget them when he actually gets to describing how these events actually unfolded. Thus, he states, the mullahs and the anjuman were unworthy, and the movement was secretly controlled by the Secret Center. The exiling of the anti-constitutionalist renegade Mir Hashem and the reactionary Friday Imam of Tabriz, and keeping the anjuman from being shut down by the central government, was all they're doing. And yet, The accounts of these events by Taherzadeh, Nasrallah Fathi, Taqizadeh, and Khasravi himself make no reference to the role of the secret center in these events, the Mojaheds. Again, Khasravi claims the secret center was directing the arming of the people behind the scenes. But this is belied by the contemporary record and indeed by most of Khasravi's writings on the subject. The first reference to military training in contemporary sources appeared in the Tabriz periodical Anjuman in mid-April 1907. It describes how men of Tabriz organized training in firearms. These are clearly spontaneous occurrences which leave no room for shadowy forces operating in the background. Anjuman next reported how a band of Mojaheds from Devichi held a military parade at the home of one Mohammed Boher, who seems to have underwritten this military activity. They had one drill master described as learned in the military arts. Moina Tojor, a prominent merchant and an Anjuman representative from Savoie, offered 22 mons to the Mojaheds, who accepted it after the usual ta'aruf. Khasravi himself often cites Anjuman as saying that the source of inspiration for the military drill was the three preachers, Sheikh Salim, Mirza Jawad Nauter, and Mirza Hussein. Indeed, it is illuminating to watch Khasravi write page after page about the rise of military drill in Tabriz without a hint of secret center intervention. Moreover, much of the military drill was done in the boroughs of Tabriz which had no conceivable connection with the secret center, such as the conservative borough of Devechi. Nor is Taherzadeh of great help here. His memoirs give no indication of the secret center guiding the arming of the people. Rather, he focuses on his own militia and the partisan political intrigues in which it was involved. Moreover, his description of much of the secret center's military activity strikes me as fanciful. He writes, for example, that the sole purpose of the center's fighting forces was combating the police, the Farash, with no mention of defending the new constitutional order. In one such anecdote, he writes that in their inexperience, he and his comrades one night mistook some trees for Rahim Khan's army and set off a massive volley on the constitutional side in the process. In another quote-unquote engagement, his comrades mistook the approach of a milkman for that of Rahim Khan's cavalry. The passages in this source give no date, but are apparently related to the siege of Tabriz. They give no indication that the constitutionalist fighters are actually at war with the Farashes. Social unrest and the socialists. One of the turning points of the Constitutional Revolution in Tabriz was the Qara Chaman affair, in which local notables, villages, peasants disobeyed the overseer, and a punitive expedition was sent which murdered and plundered the village. As it happened, this atrocity was committed with the blessing of the Mojtahid of Tabriz. This in turn led to a major confrontation between the Constitutionalists, led by Sheikh Salim and his two outspoken clerical comrades, and the Mojtahid in the local establishment. What is not clear in Khasravi's account was the nature of the disturbance. These disorders were a matter of concern to Mirza Ali Seqat al-Islam, a reformist cleric and sometime ally of the Constitutionalists, despite being a staunch member of the old landowning social class. According to him, the peasants beat the landlord, threw out of the village, imprisoned his relatives, and looted whatever they could find. He continued, some say that the cause was, from the start, some talibés. They gathered and went to the Anjuman. These, in turn, were stirred up by 2 or 3 talibés who had been talking about Qara Chaman from the start. Servants and laborers and people from Ghazalche, a village owned by the reactionary Friday Imam of Tabriz, and a bunch of others, and some socialists were also mixed in. But the context of this quotation shows that the sedition, quote-unquote, referred to the reaction of the Qara Chaman disturbance and not its cause. He saw the situation in Tabriz as different from what was unfolding in Rasht, in which troublemakers were being prepared by Russian-based Social Democrats. Later, he says, The villages are in upheaval, and that the polite, law-abiding peasants have entered the Parisian schools and emerged as anarchists and refuse to pay their taxes. Quote, they loot the granaries and talk back to the overseer. Unquote, they refuse to sow the grain given them and let the cities starve. Without reading too much into this comment, I think it's significant that Sakat al-Islam said Paris and not Russia. These were Western ideas about liberty and not the run of the ideas trickling in from from Iran's northern neighbor. In another instance, in the newspaper Majlis, the Minister of Justice, Farman Farmayan, cited a letter from the overseer of his lands in Maraghe, Azerbaijan, to the effect that the peasants were no longer paying their taxes and were calling themselves fedais. The newspaper Anjuman angrily objected, declaring that the Tabriz Anjuman was not subverting Iran's ancient feudal institutions, it only wanted to reform them. For example, it objected to these landlords turning the overseer into a tax farmer who squeezes the peasants in order to make a living. On the whole, the discussion revolved around the general anarchy in the villages, whose cause was generally agreed to have been the absence of the law which had been promised nine months previous. No mention of revolutionary activity among the peasants. Taherzadeh himself makes no reference to the secret center stirring up any class struggle. Caucasian Mojaheds and the Tabriz Mojaheds. As Kasravi explained, the Caucasian Mojaheds were Tabrizis who had lived in the Caucasus. The Caucasians were more capable and experienced, but contemptuous of the mullahs and negligent as to religious practice, and this therefore upset the common people. They followed the Baku Committee rather than the secret center, and sought to curtail the influence of Ali Monsieur and take over themselves. Quote, so a bitter conflict erupted without the people knowing why. The bazaars did not open, nor did the Anjuman convene for 3 days, and the people lived in fear. But since most of the leaders of both sides were wise and experienced, they prevented bloodshed and made peace with each other without any publicity. Nothing had happened in public, and nothing was written about it in the newspapers. Ali Monsieur and his comrades showed here their competence. Taherzadeh is surprisingly frank about the aims and methods of Ali Monsieur. His account confirms that the Caucasian Party took its orders directly from the Caucasus, which he refers to as Tiflis rather than Baku, rather than the secret center. Unlike Kasravi, he mentions the killing of several Caucasian Mojaheds in the struggle, one of them apparently being a relative of the famous Constitutionalist Hirhan Amuru. Another source on this power struggle was the conservative Constitutionalist above mentioned, Sakat al-Islam. Despite his loathing of the secret center, he clearly supported it against the Caucasians. He even stuck up for the turbulent preacher Sheikh Salim when the Caucasian Social Democrats threatened him. This was done not out of any love for the secret center. Sakat al-Islam says that its leaders were the cause of boundless sedition. It could undoubtedly have been, at least in part, out of cultural conservatism. Indeed, the Caucasian Social Democrats did not seem to be particularly revolutionary in any other sense. Thus, when bread rioters lynched a hoarder who happened to have been a constitutionalist, Sakat al-Islam noted that the hoarder had been under the protection of the Caucasian Social Democrats. Now, it should be mentioned that some of Sakat al-Islam's observations along these lines are a little puzzling. He, for example, identifies Ali Monsieur himself as a supporter of the Caucasian faction. The assassination of Yusuf Hasduz. 2 months after Ali Monsieur crushed the threat to his leadership, another threat arose from Mashdi Yusuf Hasduz. I have found no mention of Hasduz in contemporary sources, such as the newspaper Anjuman, until the report of his execution at the hands of his comrades. It's interesting, as an aside, that these Tabrizis who were seen as successors of the leadership of the Great French Revolution, Ali Monsieur was called Robespierre, the founder of the Great Terror. Ali Davafarouche, his second in command, was called Danton, a critic of the Jacobin extremists. Now Yusuf Hasduz was called Mirabeau for his oratorial talents, are so invisible in the city whose revolution they were leading. Our chief source about him is Taherzadeh again. He reports that Hasduz was a leader of the secret center. He does list him among Tabriz's 20 orators and principal writers, singling him out for his ability to transport his audience and fire them up to charge into battle. Although he had incredible powers to move the common people, the author doesn't put him on the same level as the better traveled and better educated orators. Unfortunately, the thing that goes down in history about him is his execution by his comrades. A rather terrifyingly exultant report of this is given in the pages of Anjuman, but it never explains what he was exactly charged with. All he was accused of was posing as a fedai to advance his personal interests. As a result, he was spied on by his comrades who uncovered unspecified malfeasance on his part, which called for his execution. He was then repeatedly warned that the job of being a mujahid was strictly limited to protecting Islam in Iran and freeing the people from oppression, and that he must comport himself in a manner befitting this, but had failed to do so. Taherzadeh saw Hasduz as another in a series of orators who were carried away by their own eloquence. He was guilty of, quote, indiscipline and insubordinate speech. He believed that he was himself superior to his leaders more senior than himself. Kasravi saw this as part of a policy of purging the Mojahids in the aftermath of violent or potentially violent conflicts in their own ranks. The question still remains, why was Hasduz really executed? The evidence at hand does not permit a definitive conclusion. Given that Ali Monsieur had already faced down one challenge to his authority, making it clear that he was ready to resort to arms if necessary, strengthens the hypothesis that this was indeed the issue behind Hasduz's execution. The fact that no specifics are offered by the Mojahids further strengthens this hypothesis. A time in which rivalry between Mojahid factions almost led to a civil war in Tabriz might not have been a good time for a tightly held conspiratorial secret center's leadership to tolerate a challenge from within. Taherzadeh confirms this later in his memoirs, stating, quote, Taherzadeh Hasduz was overshadowing Ali Monsieur, adding in a cryptic footnote, perhaps he had also been guilty of some crime, although I don't know. This assassination terrified the people of Tabriz and cowed Ali Monsieur's enemies. Another of his tools was Naib Khalil, otherwise known as Eid Khalil, Dog Khalil, who had an extraordinary talent for ferreting out and destroying Ali Monsieur's enemies. He finally overreached himself and murdered someone in broad daylight. Upon his arrest, he brazenly confessed to all his murders, believing that Ali Monsieur's powers could save him, but he lost this gamble and paid for it with his life. In any case, it was generally believed in Tabriz that Ali Monsieur's killers could take the life of anyone he wished, and that his authority over his mojahids was so great that at a single gesture they would menace anyone in Tabriz, although he was scrupulous about not using this power for his own narrow selfish interests. So what was actually the role of the secret center in Ali Monsieur in the Constitutional Revolution? There's no evidence to back Kasravi's claim that the secret center provided the behind-the-scenes leadership to the Tabriz Constitutionalists. Taherzadeh provides no indication of this. Another memoirist and Sattar Khan's personal secretary during the 11-month siege of Tabriz, Ismail Amir Khizi, scarcely mentions him in his Qiyam Azerbaijan with Sattar Khan, even though he seems well disposed towards him. The newspaper Anjuman only gives him one mention, and that in a laudatory but politically innocuous role of having founded a school, with the participation of the local notables. Why then did Kasravi in particular see the need to play up the secret center's role? A hint of this can be seen in Kasravi's history, where he compares it with the two Sayyids, Muhammad Tabatabai and Abdullah Bahani. Elsewhere, I have sought to demonstrate that Kasravi had exaggerated their role as the founders and guides of the constitutional movement in Tehran. He seems to have needed to write into his history of the movement the idea that it was in good hands and under sound leadership, and that the secret center played a similar role in Tabriz. As for the legend of the secret center and the historiography of the constitutional movement in Tabriz, as I have tried to show, the center was basically a stand-in for the Tabriz intelligentsia. It seems likely that the leadership given the movement in Tabriz by these more worldly Tabrizis appeared as the work of the center, when it was basically the guidance provided by people with a more cosmopolitan and political worldview than the typical Tabrizi. The end of the Tabriz Social Democrats. Ultimately, Taherzadeh led a split from the Social Democrats, claiming that the latter included undisciplined and dubious elements. The new group called itself the National Guard and was composed of, quote, literate and educated youth. The run of the Mojaheds thought that they were unfit for the rigors of battle. On the other hand, they put off by their perceived snobbery, that is, the National Guard's perceived snobbery, the Mojaheds sent them to the most dangerous fields of combat. For all one might imagine that the snappily dressed National Guardsmen were softies, they contributed to many martyrs in some of the most dangerous and decisive battles for the defense of Tabriz. Postscript: Ali Monsieur died under mysterious circumstances at an unspecified date. The story seems to be that he was attending a function sponsored by the Russian consulate in which he was poisoned. No one has so much as considered the question of what he was doing there in the first place. Two of his sons were martyred during the Red Ashura of 1330. Thank you.